Okay, there are a couple of successful rules that you need to pay attention to when you are writing your letter of application. And the first rule, the number one rule, is ask yourself, if your letter and your resume become separated from each other, is there enough information? Have you given enough information in your letter to justify that potential employer calling you in for an interview? If all you did was say, refer to my resume, there's more information about my qualifications on my resume. If that's all you've done, then your letter is not successful. But if you used your letter to go through and pull from job one, or education experience number one, or this internship, or this volunteer experience, and bring all those things together so that you show how this piece of experience and this piece of experience and this educational experience come together to show how you are the one person who's truly qualified over everybody else for this particular job, then that's a successful letter. You're connecting the items that are on your resume and showing how they qualify you for this position. That's the purpose for your letter. You also want to make sure that your letter of application gives contact information, gives your full name, gives your phone number, gives your address, so that they know how to get in touch with you when they want to bring you in for an interview. Other things you want to do, make sure that you target every single letter that you write, and if possible, if you can slip it into your letter, find a way to show some knowledge of the company so that you're able to talk about a new project that the company has just started, a new office, a new location that the company has just opened. Make sure that that knowledge is positive. You don't want to highlight a bankruptcy that the company has just had to file, but show some knowledge of what the company is talking about. That's going to be useful to you when you're called in for a job, for an interview anyway, because they're going to want to know that you did your research and you understand what this company is dealing with. But show knowledge of the company if you can. If there's a way to slip it in a way that doesn't seem forced, that doesn't seem as though you had to twist your letter around to get that knowledge of the company in. Don't list courses. Don't say that you took Blinn College's English 2311 unless the person who's interviewing you or reading your letter actually took Blinn College's English 2311. They don't know what that is. Also, don't tell them that you were an assistant manager. Tell them what you did as assistant manager. Show them what your duties were and why those job duties and that course and the things that you learned in your courses qualify you for this job. Use positive language, keep things upbeat. Also use active voice. Active voice, saying that the dog bit the boy instead of the boy was bitten by the dog, tends to be shorter, tends to be more immediate. We tend to respond more favorably to it. So use positive language, use active voice. Focus on that you attitude that we talked about in our in style and tone lecture. Focus on how the employer is affected. Focus on how the reader will benefit. How will hiring you benefit the employer? You're going to benefit because you're going to get a job. You're going to get a salary. You're going to get benefits. You're going to get to pay off your student loans and pay your bills. That's a benefit to you. But how will hiring you, the applicant, benefit the employer? That's what you have to focus on. Use that you attitude. How will hiring you benefit the employer? Don't open with an announcement of your graduation. Be prepared to explain why your graduation is going to be a benefit. Why does your impending graduation from A&M or Sam Houston or UT matter to this employer? Why should they care that you're about to graduate with a bachelor's degree? Why should they care that you're graduating from A&M? You have to explain that to this employer and why it matters to them. Don't discuss salary and don't discuss benefits unless you are specifically told to. They want to see that you're interested in something other than money. So unless they specifically tell you to discuss salary and benefits in the letter, don't discuss it. And if they tell you to specifically discuss salary and benefits in the letter, don't let that be the first thing you mention. Use a formal letter format. That means use that full block format, move everything up against the left-hand margin, and address your letter to a specific name if possible. Call the company and ask them, and tell them that you're trying to make sure that you're spelling the name of this person correctly. Ask them if Shelby is a man or a woman, if Dale is a man or a woman. Leslie, my name is Leslie Janich. Leslie in England is traditionally a man's name. I get lots of letters addressed to Mr. Leslie Janich. So call and ask the company how this person spells his or her name so that you can make sure you're addressing this person correctly. Avoid cliches. Don't try so hard to be original that you wind up sounding bizarre. I actually saw a letter that started out with, are you looking for a hard-working, eager young engineer? Well, stop. Go no further. You have found him. Yeah, you're not going to get that job. Stay away from those cliches. Don't try to be cute. Be confident. Be positive. Be realistic. Nobody can do absolutely everything. Also, don't be excessively modest. Admit when you can do things. Don't apologize when you can't. Don't sound desperate. Don't tell them that you have to have this job. Obviously, you wouldn't be applying for the job if you didn't need the job. Lots of people need jobs. Lots of people are applying for jobs. So don't beg. Don't sound desperate. Don't complain. Don't complain about the people you work for now. Don't complain about the job you're doing now. Employers like the idea of loyalty. And if you're complaining to a future employer about a current or a past employer, that tells them that you'll complain about them too. And they don't like that possibility of lack of loyalty. Yes, you're getting ready to leave that current employer. If there weren't some problem, you wouldn't be leaving that current employer. They know that there must be a problem, but they don't want to hear about it. So keep your complaints to yourself. And use your letter to present what you can't cover in your resume. You don't want to say on your resume that you worked 40 hours and went to school 40 hours, or that you financed 100% of your education and maintained a 2.5 GPA. But you can put that in your letter. You can talk about the fact that you learned time management by working 40 hours or 30 hours and maintaining a 2.5. You can talk about the fact that you learned the importance of teamwork by having to rely on people around you in order to get all your work done and in order to balance family and school and work. But that's not something that you put on your resume. That's something that you put into your letter. So use your letter of application to present what you can't cover on your resume just because there's no place for it on the resume. Now, also in the job search, you're going to have the opportunity to ask for letters of recommendation and letters of reference. You need to make sure that you're asking for the right thing when you ask for one of these. A letter of reference is written by employers, and a letter of reference acknowledges that you worked there, and that's all they have to do. You will go to an employer and ask for a letter of reference, and basically you're asking your employer, your current or past employer, to acknowledge that you worked at that company for a certain number of days and in a certain position. They are not allowed to give a negative letter of reference. They're not allowed to say something along the lines of, when this person left the company, it was a day of great joy and gladness. We would recommend you run screaming from this person. They're not allowed to do that. What they can say is that John Smith worked here from January of 2015 until May of 2015 in the position of entry-level staff clerk, something along those lines. That's all they have to say. And technically, that's all they can say if they would give you a negative recommendation. They are not allowed to trash you in a letter of reference. This person worked here from this time until this time in this job, in this position. That's all they have to say. And if they're giving you a negative reference, that's all they can say. A letter of recommendation sings your praises from the highest mountaintop. It makes a positive recommendation for employment. And if you are going to ask somebody for a letter of recommendation, you need to make sure that you are asking people you can trust. I usually tell students that if you're going to ask a professor for a letter of recommendation, you need to have a personal relationship with that person. And I don't mean that this needs to be your best friends. What I mean is that you should have had conversations with this professor outside of the classroom. So that this professor can talk about not only your schoolwork, but can talk about the things that matter to you. You should have stopped by to talk about what you want to do with your career, what you want to do with your degree once you get it. It shouldn't only have been about, I need to talk to you about this paper. This professor should know you. If you want that letter of recommendation, you should also drop off your resume. You should drop off a copy of the job or the internship you're applying for, so they have some idea of what it is they're writing a letter of recommendation for, and they're not just writing blind. But this person needs to know you. Now, the other thing you may find yourself writing as far as a letter is a thank you letter. And a thank you letter is something you write. It's not something you ask for. It's something you write. And I usually recommend that people write a thank you letter after they've had the interview. So if you've had an interview with somebody and you think the interview went well, I recommend that you wait 2 days and then write a thank you letter. It needs to be written with the same level of detail, the same attention to detail that you put into your letter of application. So everything about it should be perfect. It should be written in formal letter format, and it should be addressed to the person who interviewed you, who conducted your interview. You need to mention something specific that happened in the interview. So if you were given a tour of the company, if you were introduced to the people who you might potentially be working with, you should mention that. If you wound up connecting with the interviewer, let's say you found out that you both shared a love for Star Trek or Star Wars, and you spent 15 minutes talking about the fact that you're eagerly anticipating the release of some movie, or you're eagerly anticipating the release of a book. You share a love of video games, and you're eagerly anticipating the release of a certain video game. You can mention that, but you need to mention something specific that you discussed with that particular interviewer, so that whenever the person reads it, they are able to connect that personal experience with your face. They are able to tie the thank you letter with the interview with the person, and it's a positive experience. You also can then go back through and tell them that you look forward to the possibility of working at the company, briefly touch on again on what you think really makes you qualified, and then tell them again that you look forward to hearing from them. Tell them that if you can answer any questions, and once again, give them your phone number. Now, once again, everything about that thank you letter needs to be perfect. I've seen people who, based on their thank you letter, got moved up from second place on the list to first place. And their thank you letter actually helped get them the job, because they were waffling back and forth between the person who wrote the thank you letter and the other person who didn't. And the strength of the thank you letter got the person the job. So write the thank you letter, but make sure it's perfect, because if it's not, it can actually sink you.